Hello and welcome back to another episode of Kara's Kitchen. As I said in my previous video, we are going to be doing bread knots. Now we're going to be doing these two different ways. The first way is going to be a nice savory garlic parmesan. The second way is going to be a sweet cinnamon sugar. I'm going to be using my stand mixer today. If you don't have one, don't worry, you can do this all by hand. It's not a big deal at all. We're still going to be doing all of our kneading by hands. We do have all of our ingredients together, so let's get cooking. Okay, so today's recipe is going to be in roughly 4 different parts. The reason we're doing that is because this recipe has quite a few different steps in it so that everything turns out right and you have nice fluffy bread knots. The first step is going to be our yeast. Now, the reason why we need to do this is we need to make sure the yeast gets nice and activated. So right here I have a 1/3 cup of very warm water. You don't want it boiling because you don't want to wind up cooking the yeast. You just want it warm enough so that it gets woken up here. I put it in the microwave for roughly 30 seconds. And we have a 1/4 teaspoon of sugar. That's what the yeast is going to feed on because everyone needs breakfast when they wake up, right? And then we have a packet of our active dry yeast. Now 1 packet is roughly 2 1/4 teaspoons. So if you happen to have it in bulk, it'll be 2 1/4 teaspoons for this recipe. Okay, we're gonna get everything added in here. Okay, and we're gonna give it a little whisk. We don't wanna over mix it, but we wanna make sure that everything's nice and incorporated. And I swirl it a little bit too, just to try to get that extra yeast on the edge here. There we go. And we're going to let this sit for 5 to 10 minutes. You want it to be nice and foamy on top. So we're gonna let this sit and I'll show you what we're supposed to be looking like afterwards. Okay, so now that we have our yeast nice and activated, you're gonna have a nice foamy layer on top. So I'm just gonna move the spatula around. You see that nice foamy layer? That means our yeast is nice and active and it is ready to get some bread rising. So now we are going to move over to our stand mixer and we are going to be adding in our 1 1/3 cup of warm milk, our 1 egg, our 5 tablespoons of softened butter, our 1 1/2 teaspoons of salt, and our 1/4 cup of sugar before we add in the flour. Okay, so with my mixer, I'm going to be using 2 different attachments. I'm going to be using my paddle attachment to mix everything together. And then after I add about half of my flour, I'm gonna switch to my dough hook so it can start kneading it a little bit before I go in and work it by hand. So let's go ahead and let's get our paddle attachment on here. We are going to add in our yeast first. You wanna make sure you're scraping the bowl so you get all of that yeast in there. Okay. We'll put that over to the side. And you don't really need to add this in any order. So we'll do our sugar, our salt, our egg. We will add in our butter. We'll just use that same spatula that we used for the yeast. There we go. And it is important that it's soft, that way it can mix in really well. Okay. So our butter, and then 1/3 cup of warmed milk. Again, I just warmed it in the microwave. You don't want it boiling. You just don't want to shock the yeast because the yeast is already warmed up, so you don't want to add in cold milk. And I'm just using whole milk. So 1 1/3 cup right in there. Lower it, and I just stir it really slow, just until everything comes together and is combined. Okay, so once everything is starting to get combined, we are going to start adding in our flour. I do it 1 cup at a time. That way it not only keeps it from getting flour all over the place, but that way I can kind of keep an eye, because you may not use all of the flour and you don't want a really dry dough. So we're going to just very slowly add in roughly 1 cup at a time. And make sure you keep that rubber spatula on hands, because you will occasionally need to scrape the edges just so that everything gets combined properly. Okay, so now we are on our last cup of flour. If you can see inside here, our dough is just starting to form. I already switched over to our dough hook. We're going to add in our last bit, and I've just been kind of keeping everything mixed between the stir setting and the 2 setting. So I start with the stir setting. As you can see, a little bit of flour still coming up, just so that it stays nice and low. And then I'm going to kick it up to the 2. You will probably want to hold on to your mixer, because it is going to start to move around a lot as that dough is getting heavier on the hook. And you just want it just combined. It's going to start kind of making a little bit of a dough ball in there, which is what I like about the dough hook. It kind of creates that dough ball for me already, so I can go in and start kneading it. Okay, so now we're going to flour our surface, and we are going to get ready to knead. Now you will be kneading for 5 to 6 minutes. If you want to keep it in the mixer on low for that time so you don't have to hand knead it, you can do that. I just like to get in and work it with my hands a little bit. Helps get some of that aggression out, right? And then off to the side, I do have a greased bowl, so that once we are done kneading, we can set it in there, and it's going to rise in there for 1 hour. Okay, so I have my counter floured here. You are going to want to work the dough out a little bit. It's going to stick to the sides, just a little bit though. It shouldn't be super loose, but you will have a little bit of stick to it. We're going to turn it out here. Another reason why I don't add all of the flour and I get it a little bit sticky is because I have that extra flour on the counter, as you see here. So you're still going to be working in a little bit of the flour. And when you knead, you're just going to take your palms, push away from you, and pull it back. Just in a nice smooth motion. You can turn the dough a little bit. And the reason why you do it for 5 to 6 minutes is it makes the dough nice and smooth, makes it so everyone kind of gets together and becomes friends here, and makes it so you have a nice elastic dough that's going to be easy to work with when we start to form our bread knots. And once it comes together a little bit, I tend to do kind of a rolling motion. So pull, push to the side, push up, pull again. You're just going to make almost like a square with it. That just kind of helps you work the dough a little bit. Helps get everyone nice and combined. So we're going to do this for another 4 to 5 minutes here, and then we're going to be getting it into our greased bowl. Okay, so we have our last few seconds of kneading here. Keep in mind you probably will need to flour your surface a few times as you're kneading, because you don't want it sticking. Like, since I have a tile surface, it tends to stick a little bit, so I just keep adding a little sprinkle of flour whenever I feel it needs it. And we should be looking at a nice smooth dough here, and it should move nice and easy when you go to push it and move it around. Okay, I think we're about ready. I just like kneading dough. So now we have a nice smooth dough, nice round shape. We are going to add it in, and we're going to move it around a little bit. This oil that you're coating it with is just going to keep the dough from drying out. Okay, if you don't have plastic wrap, you can use a kitchen towel. The plastic wrap, I think, just kind of holds in that moisture a little bit more. And since it's summertime right now, it's pretty warm where we're at, so we don't have to worry about finding a warm place to keep it. But whenever I make this in the winter time or in the springtime, I'll put it by an open window where it's nice and sunny, as long as there's no draft. Or I will put it just on my oven since it tends to get a little bit warm over there. And we're gonna let this rise for 1 hour. Okay, so it's not your imagination. This is a dough ball that I made a little bit earlier. So what you're going to do is you're just gonna push it down or punch it down. And I tend to give it just a little bit of a fold in here before I bring it out onto my floured surface. So again, I floured my counter there. Then you just wanna squish it. So we like to do the rising because that's what gives you a nice fluffy dough. That's that nice softness that you bite into when you bite into your bread knot. Okay, and then I kind of coat it a little bit, get a little bit more flour on my counter here. See, just a nice little sprinkle. And you're going to take roughly a golf ball size of dough, like so. You're gonna put it on your counter and you're gonna roll it out. Just kind of move it around with your fingers a little bit. And we're going to make a nice 1/4 inch round. Sometimes you might just need to move it around with your hands a little bit. But nice 1/4 inch round. Anywhere from 7 to 9 inches is fine. And once we have it like that, we're gonna start making the knots. So we're going to literally make a knot with it, like so. And then I tuck the little tails underneath. That just gives it a nice little knot look there. Okay, so we're coming up on our last few bread knots here. So something that I like to do, I've done it both ways to where I just pinch it off and pull it, but I tend to like to kind of portion it out a little bit. That way I can just go in and start rolling and putting them together. Just so that it's all set and ready to go. I know everyone's going to be the same size. Don't want anyone to be too different. And as you're going, just kind of making sure that all of the tails are tucked in, because you don't want anything to burn either. Funny story about how I made my very first batch of garlic bread knots. So it was when Jordan and I first started dating and I came to visit him. It was April and it was kind of rainy. He was at work and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna make a nice pasta dinner and I'll make some homemade bread knots to go with it. So I went to the store. This was before I started playing around with different recipes and making my own dough. And I bought some store-bought pizza dough and I just kind of started rolling it out and putting some toppings on it. And he absolutely loved it. And funny enough, he was going to take me to a restaurant, which we found it closed down because he said they were the best bread knots he'd ever had. So we had bread knots one way or another. I don't know if they were the best he ever had, but he tends to like them. He asked me to make them for him every now and then. Okay, so coming up on our last one here. You don't have to worry about getting them too far apart, but you don't want them right on top of each other because they're still going to be rising for another hour. So you want to give them a little bit of room to expand and move around a bit. Okay, so one last time, our knot, and I just tuck the tails right underneath and into the center. See? That way it has a nice knot look to it, almost like a pretzel. Okay, so it is on a greased cookie sheet. Again, we're going to be taking our cling wrap, plastic wrap, and we are going to cover these guys up and set them someplace warm so they can rise up for 1 more hour before we start turning on our oven and getting all of those yummy toppings on it. And I just do 2 sheets of plastic wrap. That way you don't have to worry about not covering it enough. go. Okay. So once you have your plastic wrap on, we're going to be doing this for 1 more hour, and then we'll come back and we'll start putting all of our toppings on before we go in the oven. Okay, so our bread knots have risen for 1 hour. As you can see, they're nice and big. They're about the size of my palm here. I already separated them between 2 different ones because if you are going to be doing 1/2 of them savory, 1/2 of them sweet, you don't want them mixed together because that just would not taste very good. So this makes roughly 20 bread knots per batch. So I have 10 here for my savory and 10 over here for my sweet. So why don't we go ahead, we'll get started on the savory one. So we are going to go ahead and get our butter that's already melted. I have about 2 tablespoons of butter. We're going to add 1 tablespoon of olive oil, 2 cloves of garlic, minced is fine. You can buy it already minced, otherwise just mince it on your chopping board there. Okay, a little bit of salt, a couple pinches should do the trick, and a couple pinches of pepper. There we go. Give this a good stir. And I did already grease the pan over here. I just used some cooking spray. And I have the oven preheated at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have our mixture all together here. You see the nice big pieces of garlic in there. See right there? I like it extra garlicky. Okay. So we have our bread knots, and if you don't have a brush, you can just use a regular spoon and spoon it on top. Otherwise, we're just going to get a nice, good helping there with some of the garlic, and we're going to pat it right on top. We're going to do this for all 10 of them here. Just scoop and pat. And don't worry about making it look perfect or, you know, making a bit of a mess. You just want to make sure they're all coated. There we go. And you will probably use all of this. There we go. And of course, if you're going to be just making them all garlic bread knots, it'll be 1 to 2 cloves of garlic, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, your pinches of salt and pepper, roughly 4 pinches of them total, so 2 of salt, 2 of pepper, and your 4 tablespoons of melted butter. Okay, so we have that all together, and then I do just a little sprinkle of the Parmesan on top. That's going to make it nice and cheesy when you bite into it, and the Parmesan is going to create a little crust, so you have a little crunch on them when you bite into them. And I didn't really measure it out. If I were to guess, I probably have 1/4 to 1/3 cup here of Parmesan cheese. I just want a nice thick coat on top. Okay. I'll just go back and sprinkle a little bit more on everyone here. Okay, so these will go in 400 degrees for 10 to 12 minutes, and then we will be putting our fresh chopped parsley on top once they come out. And why don't we go ahead and we'll move these aside and we will work on our cinnamon sugar ones. Okay, so for our cinnamon sugar ones, we're not going to be putting much other than our butter on top. So I have here 2 tablespoons of melted butter, and we're just gonna brush them right on top again. I have it on a greased cookie sheet. We're just gonna brush the tops, making sure that everywhere that you can see has a little bit of butter on it. And we're going to be putting the cinnamon sugar on top afterwards. We're just going to give them a nice light dusting. And I do like to make the 2 different ones, just because then you have a little bit of something with dinner and then a little bit of something for dessert. All right, last few here. I tend to go a little heavy-handed with the butter. And then you will be melting 1 more tablespoon just to give them one last coating on top once they come out of the oven. So again, in the oven, 400 degrees for 10 to 12 minutes. Okay, so 15 minutes in the oven for these guys. This is going to be our garlic parmesan one. These are going to be the ones for our cinnamon sugar. Again, they baked at 400 degrees Fahrenheit in the oven. So why don't we go ahead, we'll finish these garlic parmesan ones off first. So really simple. All you need to do is just sprinkle a little bit of your parsley on top. And we'll just kind of get these little leaves that fell here. You don't need a whole lot, just enough so that you get a nice fresh bite. And you see that golden brown color, that's what we're looking for when they come out of the oven. Okay, so now that we finished those ones off, see, super quick to finish them off. Now we are going to do a little small brush of butter for the cinnamon sugar ones. And this is just plain butter, about a tablespoon melted. A couple more here. Okay. And then I have a ½ cup of sugar and 2 tablespoons of cinnamon. I'm just going to add them together and give them a nice little stir. Probably could have done a bigger bowl, but that's okay. Just wanted to make sure all of that cinnamon and sugar is mixed in together. Okay. So I have a nice mixture here. And you do have a lot here. You can either use it all right now, or you can save it for future recipes that you'll be needing the cinnamon sugar mixture for. And you're gonna take your spoon, just sprinkle it right on top. It will get a little bit messy. Okay, and there you go. So cinnamon sugar ones are all done, and our garlic parmesan ones are all done. Okay, so there you have it. We have successfully made our garlic parmesan bread knots and our cinnamon sugar bread knots. So why don't we give these a try? And just looking at them, they're still nice and warm. You can see they puffed up, they have a nice golden crust. And then that Parmesan made a nice crust on top too. Okay, here we go. It's nice and fluffy. There's still a little bit of chew to it, just like a pizza dough would have. See how nice and thick that still is? Perfect. Okay. thank you so much for joining me today for our bread knot recipe. Join me next week. We are going to be tackling some salmon. If you aren't really comfortable cooking with fish, I'm going to show you a nice light recipe. I do like salmon just because it tends to absorb flavor really well. It's a good fish to start with if it's something you're not really comfortable. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go into that next week. But for today, please stay safe. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel so you can keep seeing all these wonderful videos. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!